Hello everyone, I'm Kelly Beatty for Chelmsford Telemedia, and we are gathered here today in the studio to talk about a project that's been ongoing for the last 2.5 years, that being the plan, or at least the discussion about rehabbing 2 of the fire stations here in town, 2 of the 5. Many of you know that over the last decade or so we've improved 2 of the stations, the one in Center and the one in North Chelmsford. And you know, a lot of our buildings are quite old and in need of some attention, and we're trying to find out how much attention that's needed. There's been a task force going after this problem for the last 2.5 years. So let me introduce you the folks that we've gathered here today to discuss that, a basic discussion before it comes up for town meeting in just a very few weeks. On the far left here is Bob Destremp, who is a citizen on the committee, but he also serves as a deputy chief in Lowell, so he has a lot of experience there. Next to him is Rob Albion, who is representing our firefighters union here in town, the firefighters that protect us day and night. And in the middle there is Virginia Crocker-Timmons of the Select Board, who has served as the chair for this study group. And then we have Chief Gary Ryan, the fire chief.
You just gave me a raise, Kelly.
I did. And then Town Manager Paul Cohen. Chief Ryan, I'd like to actually start with you, if you don't mind. We have had now for a decade, we've seen the improvements to the Center Station and to the North Station. That was a process that was in some ways similar to this. We had needs and we met them. I was wondering if you could give us an update on how it's going.
So I think, first of all, thank you for having us. I certainly appreciate everybody's time because we've been, like you said, we've been at this for 2.5 years. We will be in the fire headquarters for 10 years this December. And Engine 2, the project you just referenced, we will be there 3 years. So we actually opened Engine 2 on the same anniversary of the fire headquarters. But certainly it's given us an opportunity to see what a modern fire station should look like, what the needs are and those are some of the thoughts that we brought into this process when we sat down with Weston and Sampson, who designed the fire headquarters. Myself, Rob was part of that, Greg Sagini, who's the other member, was on that. We looked at currently what we have in existing outlying stations, but also we looked at what we have in Engine 2. We did site visits, and then we identified needs, and based on those needs, that's where we came up with the conceptual drawings. But the fire headquarters in Engine 2 has given us an opportunity to look at safety needs, what we like, and what we would change in a new station.
Mm-hmm. And for a 30,000-foot view, Paul, the town has 5 fire stations, sort of geographically distributed, north, south, east, west, and center. One of the points that has been raised over the years, you know, when you've been forced, not necessarily you, but when a fire station has had to close, there's a lot of examination of like response times and stuff. It was part of this activity between you and Virginia, was it to confirm that in fact 5 stations are still needed and they are in the best places they can be now?
Yeah, and that was part of the efforts of our committee in the initial phases before we got to the building design on this project. We looked at the call volume of the department, where the calls were coming from, and the response times, because it's not just the first engine, it's also the backup firefighters and apparatus that responds to a call, particularly if it's a working fire or a significant accident and so forth. So we actually had a consultant with data look at where the calls are, the response, where our stations are, what's an effective response time, and then the firefighters on the committee helped us by confirming our data with their own independent analysis through the fire union. So basically, that was critical because the whole purpose of all this is public safety in terms of being able to respond to the needs of the community. But in addition to public safety, there's firefighter safety.
Right.
And that's really what these projects are about. It's the living quarters that they're housed in. So yes, we quickly came to a consensus that to provide effective response times to calls in the community, we needed to maintain the 5 stations. But the critical part after that was, what are the conditions of the 5 stations? And as you noted earlier, initially when I arrived in town 18 years ago, it was the sad state, for lack of a better word, of the center fire station, where we were holding that facility up, with wooden beams.
Yeah.
We finally got that opened, as the chief noted, a decade ago. We then pivoted to the next busiest station in the critical station up at North. That project has been completed. We're doing a little bit of exterior facade work that people will see in the next few weeks to address that issue. But now we've got to address stations that were built in the 1960s. For a community that's quite different than where we are today. And that's really why we need to have facilities that meet the needs of the community moving forward as we pass the first quarter pole of the 21st century, but also meet the firefighters' needs in terms of being able to effectively operate, live in a facility that's running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
And I wanted to turn to Rob and Bob with boots on the ground experience. What's it like to work in a facility that is 70 years old and with all the bumps and warps that come with that?
So the 58 members of the Chelmsford Fire Department that are in the union, we make do with what we have. The big thing for us as far as the union is the firefighter health and safety standards that go into these buildings. I heard my good friend say the other day, we'd work out of an outhouse. We don't care. We're going to try to do what we can for the residents of town. But, the big concern for the fire service now is the cancer aspect of this. 2023, last year, the International Association of Firefighters, out of all of the line of duty deaths that occurred, 73% were related to cancer due to on-the-job exposures. So if we can mitigate those risks, it's going to benefit the members of the department, but it's also going to help the town because the town essentially owns that firefighter if it's on-the-job related cancer injury. But as far as the stations, like I said, the conditions, we make it work. Obviously, there are improvements. We try to do things, and the chief and the town manager have done a great job of trying to mitigate some of those risks. One of those things being the PFAS-free gear that the select board just approved with ARPA funding. That's one way to mitigate our risk inside of these stations. We have a Plimo-Vent system, which extracts a majority of the diesel exhaust particulates from these trucks that are in these stations. But there's still off-gassing from our gear that occurs within our living quarters, which poses a significant risk to all of our members.
Right.
I agree with Rob on everything he said, but also when it comes to fire stations, a point that the town manager brought up, which I never knew when we first started the committee, was your infrastructure should last for 50 years. So when we started looking at the fire stations, these fire stations are 50 and 52 years old, I think. So we're ready to make a move on them now. And now in those 50 years, the fire service has changed immensely. I mean, the gear we wear used to be just a pair of boots and a little raincoat. Now we're wearing a full set of gear. Well, you need space for that gear. And not only that, where at one time, we used to just bring the gear into your dorm room and put it on there to go respond to a call. Those days are over, as Rob said. We're finding that firefighting is causing a lot of cancer. The firefighting occupation has a higher risk of cancer than a lot of other occupations. So we're learning that the gear needs to be put in a special area. The dormitories and the living quarters need to be put away from where the equipment is. Also, fire apparatus, if you look at a fire apparatus from 1970 or 68 when these stations were built compared to fire apparatus today, totally different. I mean, a lot larger, so we need a lot more space just for apparatus. And the increase in equipment, things like rescue companies, Jaws of Life, that are used at motor vehicle accidents. At one time, back in the 60s, I'm not even sure what the Jaws of Life was, right? Now we're using several areas of the building to store that type of equipment. So the time is now to take a look at this infrastructure.
So Virginia, as the task force got rolling, how quickly did it become apparent that you homed in on these two stations, south and east, as the targets for rehab?
It took some time to get there because we did a very thorough analysis. We wanted to look at what is our current state and what's the ideal future state based on standards and also what other communities are doing. Recognizing that we can't pragmatically get to that ideal state, we said, okay, what are some reasonable compromises? And we went through and evaluated against 5 critical success factors: the conditions of the stations themselves, as Bob alluded to, the equipment that they house and that needs to be used in the operations, We looked at firefighter safety, both from the standpoint of how many firefighters are on a piece of apparatus when they respond to an emergency, and the safety of the living quarters itself, as well as how do you accommodate a workforce now that has multiple genders, which we definitely didn't have 50 plus years ago. And then we looked at public safety and the response times that Paul said was so important. And the last thing that we looked at was the investment required. We evaluated 9 different scenarios, anywhere from 3 stations to 5. Across those 9 scenarios, with our 5 critical success factors, there were like 16 different interrelated variables. So it took some time to look at how those variables were all affected. And then, as Paul said, we took the time to get some outside expertise on different analyses and concepts.
So let's have a look at the plan that you've come up with. Paul has supplied a little short PowerPoint here. If we could cue that up. And Paul, if you wouldn't mind narrating as those show up, you can watch there on the screen. And,
Sure, we'll go through it. The first slide really just gives you an overall assessment of the condition of the 5 stations in town. As the chief noted, Station 1, which is your top left, that's been open now just about 10 years, and that's obviously in very good condition. To the right is the North Fire Station, which we opened back basically in 2001. And so really our focus is the remaining 3 stations. And here we're really talking about Station 3, which is the bottom left, West Station, and Station 5, the bottom right. And the reason we're not talking about Station 4 is Station 4 is adequate. There's really no major safety or living issues there. And the reason for that is, if you look carefully at the slide, is that's our newest station, which was built in the mid-1970s. So again, the needs are West Station, which is at Roberts Field, and at the South Station on Acton Road, right before Kate's Corner. And so you go to the next slide. This is really what the story is about. The pictures really do the justice of explaining what's happening here. And as was noted earlier in our discussion, you can see there's your fire apparatus in the station, and you can see the closest in proximity to the lockers and the living quarters in the station at Station 3. And then similarly, if you go to the next slide on Station 5, it sort of gives you the situation there on the right. And there's a situation, this really focuses, you can see, on the living quarters of the firefighters. That, if you look to the left in the middle box, you can see that that's the construction of where these firefighters stay. And that obviously was an addition to the existing building, because you can see in the top left, it's right behind the fire apparatus. And as Rob noted about the Plimo vent, yeah, you've got vehicle exhaust ventilation systems, but the bottom line is your living quarters are in the apparatus bay. You can see the turnout gear, which has all the exposure from what they go through for a fire scene. That's out and exposed. And you can see to the middle on the right, that's the living quarters. Right. 2 beds, obviously a very cramped situation. And as Virginia noted, it wasn't built for 2-gender firefighting force that you have now as we're approaching, the year 2025. So it's really cramped quarters.
Chief Ryan, before we flip to the next slide, in a situation like that, where do you go to decontaminate your gear, or do you do it out in the street, or how does that happen?
So I think, as Rob made a good point, you make it work. We're fortunate in the center station in Engine 2, which was built 3 years ago, 2021, that station, we have a dedicated space for deconning our gear and cleaning. We don't have that in these substations,
right,
which is an issue. Can the members bring the stuff in? Yes, but we do try to make it work because we have 5 stations. One thing the manager was talking about, the apparatus room. Yes, we have the bedrooms in there. We have the gym in there. We have the lockers in there. But also, that takes up critical space for the apparatus. We can't drive the truck through because that stuff is being pushed into the apparatus bay. So not only is it a safety need, but it also takes, operationally, it takes up space from the trucks from pulling through.
Right.
You try to minimize how many times you back up these large trucks.
Right.
And right now, we cannot do that at these substations.
Let's flip to the next slide, and we can start looking at what you have planned, I think.
Yes, this shows a station at Roberts Field on Old Westford Road. The top right of the station. You can see the area in yellow is the addition. So that's the easiest thing to spot is the addition. You can see it would go opposite for the parking lot to the current station. So we would renovate the current apparatus bay, and then add the living quarters to the right there at Roberts Field. So again, it's really not going to impact the community use of Roberts Field, but it does have an area where we can nestle that in for the space.
And as was the case in North Station, Station 2, it's just a modular add-on to the existing station?
Exactly. And if you see the next slide, you'll see sort of the layout of the facility. And basically, so you have your existing apparatus bays, which is your left appendage, and then basically all the living accommodations and the the gear extraction rooms and the locker room, everything is away from the fire apparatus. But even the place where they would have their turnout gear and so forth, that's separate, and so they can come in right off the apparatus and into that area, change, and then leave into a separate area for where they would have their dorm rooms, their kitchen area and living space. That's that, and then in a workout area, as the chief noted, and as well as the office space and so forth if the public comes to the facility. So that's the situation. You can see individual bedrooms for people. So in a COVID situation, that was a challenge because you can't put two people in a confined space, and as well as the issue of gender and comfort. So that's the issue. If you now go to the layout of Station 5 on the next slide, Station 5 on Acton Road, that's a very small postage stamp size lot. So that's going to have to be a two-story facility. So the existing facility there will be raised entirely, and then a new facility will be constructed on that site, 2 stories. So again, as you see the next slide, you'll see the layout of that facility. Again, the big appendage on the bottom to the left, the apparatus bays, and then on the ground floor, you'd have your street entrance, with your vestibule, your office space, and then a stairway that would go upstairs to the living quarters. But on the main level, again, after the apparatus bays, you have your locker rooms, your gear area, and the gym in the back and so forth. So again, anything that's of a hazard is sort of segregated. So your apparatus bays are segregated, your turnout gear and locker rooms are segregated, and then the firefighters would go upstairs to the living area. And if you go to the final slide, you'll see the upstairs very similar to what we saw in the earlier station at Roberts Field. Again, your living space is upstairs, your bathrooms, your bedrooms, as well as the stairwells going up. And so basically that's how it lays out. And so again, as you noted, this can be done by modular construction. We've also looked at stick-built and even a hybrid. So we'll obviously go for the most cost-effective solution towards this effort.
In both cases, what does that represent in terms of those stations being offline during the period of time for construction, especially in South, where I live, Paul? So
Okay.
help me out here.
Yeah, I'll have the chief explain how we will operate during the construction.
So what we, I think if you remember for Engine 2, we did have a substation that we actually were able to put a modular unit, 2 of them together, and make that work at Richardson Road. We will try to replicate that down south to try to find a space close by where the firefighters can respond from.
You've got South Road, Byham School, right? Could you do it in the parking lot, or would?
We got Byham School. We got a place close to you too, across the street at the country club.
Great, yeah.
There we go.
And then Roberts Field,
And so,
obviously.
there'll be a country club,
There we go. But that's the idea. We would look at that to keep that presence there.
Okay, so none of this comes free. You're going to be asking town meeting for the monies to do this. I was looking at it. Looks like the total is somewhere between $20.8 and $24.4 million for Station 2, and I think for Center Station, Station 1. In both of those cases, you did that basically as a capital improvement expense. There was no Prop 2.5 override needed, but that's what you're going for this time. Can you explain the logic?
Yeah, it basically, it's on the town's debt capacity and our budget capacity. The constraints we have today, we don't have the ability to fund this within the Proposition 2.5 levy limit. So we're going to ask for debt exclusion on the November 5th state election ballot, which will be following the town meeting vote at the end of October at fall town meeting. So both of those have to be approved in order for this project to move forward. And we've designed a cost calculator so somebody could enter the value of their property and know what the additional cost.
Is there a website for that?
Yeah, and it's on our fire station website. I know Pete's got the graphic that he'll put on the screen that describes how to get there. But the simple thing is, if one misses the graphic or thinks about it later, is you go to the town's website, go to the fire department, you'll see the link that has for the fire station study committee, and that'll bring you to a separate dedicated page. But more importantly, the cost issue, is real. We understand it. But the good thing is, meanwhile, we did look at everything. We brought in our finance director. We look at our debt schedule. We're paying off excluded debt for the sewer project. Mm-hmm. And so by adding this debt, even though they will require a ballot vote, the net impact isn't just entirely onerous, because we're paying down the existing debt that was approved by the voters for a debt exclusion for the sewer project, and then this comes layers on top. So the good news is it won't be an extreme impact to the community in terms of the cost, but it is a required vote of debt exclusion in order to impose that debt that, like the sewer project, would only be for the life of the debt for this project, and then it goes away.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if I'm taking history as any example, there's been pretty robust community support, town meeting support for these public safety improvements. And it sounds like it's more a carefully timed pair of votes that have to both be accomplished in order to have this go forward.
Yeah, exactly. So again, we're having a number of information sessions leading up to the town meeting, and that's, again, available at the website over the next several weeks. And then there'll be a discussion at town meeting. We anticipate it'll be the first item addressed the second session of town meeting, so on the 24th, that Thursday night, which we believe will be the second and final session of town meeting.
This is going to be Article 16.
Yeah, but it'll be the first article considered that night. Just like when we did the MBTA zoning, we told people it's going to be the first item considered, because Virginia's going to give a detailed presentation. There'll be a question and answer period, and then discussion. And we want to make sure that you're not doing this, that people are doing it fresh and have ample time, instead of taking up under Article 16 at like 10:20 in the evening, and people are looking at their watches saying, well, when are we going to go home?
Right.
So we anticipate a 2-session town meeting, and this will be the discussion at the second session.
Virginia, you mentioned that you had all of these variations that you looked at on different ways of doing it. Was there a kind of a consensus of where you were going, or was there a debate over where the station should be placed or what the capacity should be? One of the things I noticed is that you have room for growth just in terms of the staffing at the fire stations, as opposed to making do with what you have now. You've planned for a future with more firefighters in place.
The alternatives that we looked at ranged from a 3-station scenario where we would build a new 3rd station, all the way up to 4 and 5 stations. And I think we kicked that around for quite a while. What really got us to a decision very quickly is when we finally got all of the response time analysis data and understood that in order to satisfy the response times for public safety, we really felt that we needed the 5 stations. And
Chief,
I don't know if you want to add to that, Chief.
But a standard response time, a good response time, and what are ours?
So what we looked at, when we looked at, like Virginia was talking about the model, the 5 stations, that is the strength of the Chelmsford system. Whether it was the study we brought in 2017 with Criterion, the union, Rob was talking about the study they brought in. We looked at our response times, and I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was like we can respond to 84% of our calls within 4 minutes. That's fantastic. And that is, I think, ultimately what kind of led us to keep in this 5-station model. Yes, we could do it for under 3 or 4 stations, but I think when we started looking at those second calls the manager was talking about, it started spreading those response times out a little longer.
So if I can interject, sorry. So the response time data that we're discussing, and how, where does that number come from? So this is actually developed by the National Fire Protection Agency. It's a national agency that studies the fire service, and this is all backed by science and data. And the chief is right. The 4-minute response time is the gold standard, and we respond based on our current station locations to 89% of those calls, emergencies, accidents, everything within 4 minutes. Which is remarkable for a town of our size and population.
And just to be clear, since you're keeping the configuration that you have, with these improvements, would you imagine that the percentage would go up even more, or should it stay about the same? in terms of the response, of the 4-minute response
So
time?
that's a variable that was kicked around because we had to take historical call data from within Chelmsford and where are these calls located, like the town manager mentioned. Historically, a lot of calls are kind of focused on certain areas of town, but you still have to take in the aggregate total of the entire town. So the majority, overall, like I said, 89%, yeah, that could improve. The improvement could that be, turnout time out of the station. That's one variable that we can affect on ourselves is, okay, how fast are we getting ourselves together and getting out of the station to respond to these calls? Because there's certain time parameters that are allotted in that 4-minute response window.
And then the other thing that
And then
happens is there's multiple calls that happen
Sure.
simultaneous. So they could be out on one call and then a second or a third call is coming into the community. And so you've got two variables taking place, which is why you want the 5 stations. You've got multiple calls that occur simultaneously, and you also have apparatus supporting those calls. So if it's a working fire, they've got to bring people in from other stations, to help address a serious incident.
And Kelly, the second part of your question was with respect to staffing growth and the fact that we're allowing for that. So just quickly, as the needs and the calls have grown and the population of the town has grown, our staffing in our fire stations has been the same for like the last 25 years. And so, yes, we are allowing the capacity to potentially grow the staffing going forward. And Chief has applied actually for a grant to do maybe a first increment of that through a federal funding source.
And I think I understand that even given the facilities that you have now, like Center Station and North Station, you could add 4 firefighters now if you want?
We have the ability to
Yes.
add staffing, correct?
And then once these are complete, that's another 4 that you could add?
That is correct.
Yes.
That
think
came
that-
into play during this whole operation
Sure.
of the fire stations. As a committee, we did start looking at staffing, separate than from the fire station building committee. And we started talking about what the minimum staffing is in Chelmsford compared to other towns our size. And we're playing around with that a little, so we know where we want to get to at some point, and these stations will cover that aspect of the extra staffing, hopefully down the road. But the one thing I thought was great about this committee is we are very budget conscious on everything that we fiscally conscious, because we understand the way Chelmsford is. I mean, I've been living here since '93, and that people are very fiscally conscious in this town, and that's why the presentation of this product that we're putting out there, I hope that the taxpayers go out there, the residents of Chelmsford, and come to the tours and come and look at it, look at all the information we have, but go tour the fire stations and see what we're talking about. You need to see firsthand. And I invite families with small children. Listen, these guys will take it. You don't even have to go on the day of the tour. Go visit your fire station tomorrow. These guys will open those doors to anybody, and kids can play on the trucks and learn some firefighting, and the parents can at least look and see why we need a change in our infrastructure right now.
So as you did with the Center Station, you planned some open houses to tour these facilities to show what's there now?
We have open houses planned the first Saturday in October. That's also on the website, and we'll be getting some flyers out. Our information session is the evening of October 10th, and that's going to be at Station 3. And then we're going to have another Q&A session October 29th right at Station 3.
Great. Well, it's incumbent on all of you watching this program to understand that this is potentially for your benefit and for you to get a sense of what is being planned, whether you're comfortable with that, and conveying that to your town meeting reps, who will be the ones who vote on your behalf at town meeting for this or against this program. I want to thank you all for coming in today.
And then also, let's not forget they got to vote at the ballot on November 5th.
Yes, right. Well,
Important part.
I suspect voter turnout is not going to be a problem. Thank you all very much for coming in.
Thank you, Kelly.
I look forward to seeing those open houses. And for the rest of us here at Chelmsford Telemedia, I'm Kelly Beatty. Thanking you for joining us. Have a great day.